I'd like to introduce Ben Cassidy. Ben Cassidy is good friends with our speaker, and he will introduce our speaker once Deb McCabe sits down. Deb McCabe. Okay. Ben Cassidy most recently served as the Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. He retired from the United States Marine Corps in 2002. His father, Walter, was a World War II veteran who fought at the Battle of the Bulge, earning the Silver Star Medal. And his grandfather, Joseph, was a veteran of several campaigns in World War I that I can't pronounce the name. So anyway, welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Kathy. Well, thank you, Kathy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to introduce former Secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission and retired United States Army Major General Bill Matz. Bill began his professional life as a distinguished soldier, earning one of our nation's highest awards for valor, the Distinguished Service Cross. Upon retirement from the Army, he continued to serve his country, to include our nation's veterans, as a member of the Veterans Disability Benefits Commission. Most recently, General Matz was appointed by President Trump as the 8th Secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission, a unique federal agency that watches over America's overseas military cemeteries and battle monuments. More on this shortly. It's especially appropriate that General Matz and his lovely wife, Linda, join us today as we approach Veterans Day and reflect on the meaning of this day. No one exemplifies more, as individuals or as a couple, service and sacrifice on behalf of our country. Thank you. On a personal note, Bill Matz is a humble, gracious, thoughtful, a man of deep faith. He cares strongly about family, the people around him, and those he is blessed to lead, whether on the field of battle, industry, or in my personal experience, the American Battle Monuments Commission. I hope you might ask Bill as well to tell you a bit of his personal story, to be published in December, entitled My Toughest Battle. It promises an uplifting story of faith, overcoming adversity, and the joy of living in the greatest country on earth. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend and genuine hero, General Bill Matz.
Oh my God, folks, please sit down. It's wonderful, a soldier like me being introduced by a United States Marine. You know, I wasn't sure that when this day came, whether it would be a day of mourning or a day of jubilation. So obviously it's a day of jubilation. And I sat here listening to all the introductions of the people that worked so hard to get this county and this state to vote the way they did. It made my heart feel good because this is the grassroots level. This is where things happen and where we vote our people in. And it was just amazing to listen to what you're doing here and also what you're doing for our veterans. And I appreciated very much our chaplain's prayer about Teddy Roosevelt, and I'll mention him in my brief remarks here. And I promise you, folks, yeah, Roosevelt was a great guy, but I'm not going to take 84 minutes to talk, okay? But anyway, folks, my wife and I are honored to be with you here today. I appreciate this opportunity, and I thank your president, Kathy, and the Naples Republican Women's Club for inviting me to be here today to share with you and to bring you the story of the American Battle Monuments Commission. At the advent of my comments here, how many ever heard of ABMC? Don't be embarrassed, folks. Yeah. So many Americans have not. And so I want to bring that story with you today. As Ben mentioned, I was the secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission under the first Trump administration, 2017 to 2021. Ben was one of our 10 commissioners there. And as I say, I'm going to enlighten you today on this wonderful agency and what it does for our country. I was, in fact, a political appointee appointed by the president, but I will tell you, folks, this presentation is apolitical. I promise that I'll try to keep the political aspects out of it here. So I think one of the first questions I know that many have is, well, Bill Matz, how did you get to be selected? I was appointed. It's a secretary's position that is just under the 18 cabinet positions. And I'll take a second here to tell you that. You'll recall that Trump handily beat Hillary Clinton in November 2016. Yeah. She still can't get over what happened the other night. But folks, it was less than 3 weeks later, just after Thanksgiving in November 2016, I was sitting comfortably at home reading the newspaper, as I recall, in our Great Falls home when the phone rang. Bill, would you be interested in serving in the Trump administration? Well, the phone was on speaker, folks. My wife, Linda, was right there. She said, "Of course he would." I had been retired for some time, and she wanted me out of her space. I still hear it. That's exactly what happened. Anyway, the phone call was from two gentlemen that I had the privilege of serving with in the Army. You know Keith Kellogg. You hear him on ABC News. Very dear friend of mine. Actually, he worked for me at one time. It was him and Mike Meese. Mike Meese is the son of Ed Meese, who was Reagan's Attorney General. Both of these folks were on the Trump transition team. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about the Trump transition team. So anyway, they asked me, and I said, yes, I would be interested. I'm the kind of guy, I was getting bored sitting around. I need to be in the fray. I need to be responsible for something, doing something. I was getting bored. And as I say, she wanted me out of the house. So they were trying to get me to go to the Department of Veterans Affairs or to take an undersecretary position in the Department of Defense. I really didn't want either of that. I had spent 7 years in the Pentagon, the Puzzle Palace there. I didn't want to go back there. And frankly, folks, I didn't want to cross the Potomac River and have to work in D.C. every day at the Department of Veterans Affairs. So I said, what else do you have? And so they looked around, but I remembered when I was an active duty soldier about the American Battle Monuments Commission. I threw that out to him. And Keith Kellogg said, yeah, Bill, that's one of my responsibilities to come up with some candidates for that. He said, there's a lot of travel. And I said, I don't care. I said, I think I'd be a good fit for that. I'm an infantryman. About 80% of the American soldiers buried in those cemeteries overseas were infantry. And so anyway, to make a long story short, they vetted me, they ran through the process, and in December 1, 2017, I got a call saying the president had appointed me. It was a great call. And they said they put 3 names before him that day. This is what I was told. And he selected me, and apparently what Trump says is, I want that guy. He was an infantryman. This is what I was told by Keith Kellogg. Very interesting story. I didn't know President Trump from Adam, and he certainly didn't know me. But anyway, I started my service. I was sworn in January of 2018, and Ben and the commissioners came on board around April and May. And so we started to put together a great commission there. So that's the story about how I was elected here. I didn't want people to think that I had known President Trump for a long time or he had known me. He did not. But anyway, folks, honoring the service and sacrifice is what we do. And I will tell you, it was a great 3 years with the federal government doing that. In truth, it wasn't a job, folks. It was actually a sacred calling. That's the way I saw it. And so if you give me the next chart here, I guess I hit it here. Yeah. We're a small federal commission that is actually reports directly to the White House. We don't report through the Department of Defense. We don't report through the Department of Veterans Affairs. So we report directly to the White House, which I sort of enjoyed. And our founder was, as you see here, was John J. Pershing. He was the first secretary, the first chairman, and he stayed in there until 1948. He was one of the 2 general of the armies the country has ever had. And the Congress appointed him general of the armies, which is a 6-star general, back in 2019. And the other one, folks, was George Washington, who was posthumously voted in 1976 at the 200th anniversary of our country. And of course, you know, we have 9 5-star generals. So here's the mission of the American Battle Monuments Commission. Very clearly and simply stated, we commemorate the service and the sacrifice of United States Armed Forces. And we do this by creating and maintaining memorials, sites worldwide, and cemeteries worldwide. The commission really does not operate any cemeteries in the United States. There are, in fact, 156 federal cemeteries, folks, in the United States. 9 are here in Florida. They are operated and managed by the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I know many of you have loved ones or uncles, cousins, brothers, et cetera, perhaps buried in some of those lovely cemeteries. But our commission manages the cemeteries that are overseas. These are beautiful shrines to our war dead, both those interred and memorialized on the walls of the missing. Here you see a photo of the Aisne-Marne Cemetery, which is in France. The other thing I want to mention is the Department of the Interior also manages some veteran cemeteries. Like if you've ever been to Custer National Battlefield, that's a Department of Interior managed cemetery. And of course, our Capstone Cemetery is our national cemetery there in Washington, Arlington National Cemetery, and that is managed and budgeted for by Department of the Army. So I just thought I'd throw that out because a lot of folks get confused as to American Battle Monuments and what we manage here. This here shows you where our cemeteries and memorials are as regards the various wars. You can see that we manage 26 cemeteries and 32 battle monuments in 17 countries on 5 continents. So folks, it was clearly a job that required a lot of travel. And I was happy to say that during the 3.5 months that I was secretary, I did get to visit every cemetery, and some on multiple occasions, and I got out to visit about 27 or 28 of the 32 battle monuments. You can see the numbers there. We've got about 234,000 folks. Try to get my glasses here. Yeah. We've got about 234,000 folks that are buried or memorialized in our cemeteries. I will mention this to the ladies. Obviously, they're mostly men, but we have 70 women from World War I that are interred or on the walls of the missing, and we have 111 from World War II. These are mostly Army nurses, telephone operators, postal folks, and things like that. This chart here shows where you will find us. As I said, we're across the globe. And what should jump out at you is 25 of the 58 cemeteries and battle monuments worldwide are in one country, France. And obviously you can understand that. World War I and World War II was fought there. The next highest is in Belgium. We do have 4 sites in the United States, folks. They're not cemeteries, but we manage the East Coast Memorial on the tip of Manhattan. So if you haven't seen it, or if you've never been there, the next time you're in New York, you might jump in a cab and go down to the tip of Manhattan where you get the ferry over to Staten Island. It's a beautiful memorial there. And John F. Kennedy dedicated that memorial in 1963, 2 months before he was assassinated. We also have a battle monument on the West Coast, which is at the Presidio of San Francisco, right at the foot of the Golden Gate Bridge. And then we have the Honolulu Memorial there in the Punch Bowl, and we have Pershing Park in Washington, D.C. And if you'll notice there, we do have 2 American cemeteries in 2 Muslim countries. You can see them there, Tunisia and what is it here, Morocco. They were battle casualties from some of Patton's guys and so forth when they fought at El Alamein and in the northern part of Africa. And of course, we have some memorials in distant islands in the Pacific. You can see them there. New Zealand, New Guinea, Saipan, Midway Island, things like that. Okay, for the next couple charts now, I want to show you just a few of the cemeteries so you can appreciate the beauty and the dignity of these hallowed burial grounds. Incidentally, our cemetery staffs each have a superintendent and an assistant superintendent. They must be American, and they must be able to speak the language of the country which the cemetery is in. All of the other associates, the groundskeepers and so forth, are host country citizens, and you can imagine people in France, Belgium, Italy, where our cemeteries, they fight for those positions and be able to work for the U.S. government. And particularly in the Netherlands and France, there are families that have tended to those burial plots and those cemeteries since they were founded years ago. It's a family tradition. Year after year, a son or a daughter or someone else will step in. So folks, this is the first one I want to show you, Normandy American Cemetery. How many have been there? I'm sure a few of you have. This is our flagship cemetery. It's situated above Omaha Beach. Omaha Beach stretches for 7 miles. You can see it there. Let's see. Yeah, you can see it there on the upper left-hand corner. And right above the cliffs where those soldiers came up that day on D-Day lies our cemetery. It's a beautiful cemetery. Utah Beach is 3 miles long, and that's to the, if you continue off the beach to the left, you'd get to Utah Beach. We average over 2 million visitors a year at the Normandy Cemetery. There is no fee to go into visit our cemeteries at all. As I say, about 2 million a year. COVID knocked us down. We had to close down a little bit, so we didn't have quite that many. But again, this is a cemetery that was right above the Key Beach during the D-Day landings, of which 160,000 Allied troops invaded on that D-Day morning on 6 June 1944. Of that 160,000, 78,000 were Americans. They either parachuted inland or came across the beach. Please take a look at this cemetery. 14 cemeteries like this one in Cambridge, England. We have 2 cemeteries in England, this one in Cambridge and another one. But 14 cemeteries like this contain the remains of more than 93,000 World War II dead. But please note the symmetry. Please note the symmetry of the crosses that you see there. They were evenly spaced, and they were actually put into concrete beam foundations to maintain that perfect symmetry. And it allows for easy replacement when something happens and you have to replace one. All of our headstones come from the famous Italian Carrara quarries in northern Italy. The United States government has a contract with them, and I often visited there, et cetera, to see them. The American soldiers who were Christians are buried under a Latin cross. The Jewish American soldiers are buried under the Star of David. This is our largest cemetery. It's just on the outskirts of Manila. Just look how Manila has grown up there. It is a beautiful just oasis right there, just outside of Manila. There are nearly 17,000 American soldiers buried here, but the amazing number is the 36,000 that are engraved on the walls of the missing, honoring the men and women who went down with ships, airplanes, or were lost in the jungles of the Pacific and never recovered. In fact, over 40% of the missing that are honored at our cemeteries worldwide and memorials worldwide are memorialized in this cemetery. I got to know the American ambassador real well, and he said, you know, when I had a tough day and when things went bad, I left the office, didn't even tell my staff, Bill Matz, and I just went out and walked through your cemetery and walked quietly, walked peacefully through the headstones and so forth. If you ever get to Manila, you need to visit this beautiful cemetery. This is the Meuse-Argonne American Cemetery. This is representative of the 9 World War I cemeteries that we maintain. It is ABMC's largest cemetery in Europe with more than 14,000 interred. I don't know how many history buffs might be among you, but the Meuse-Argonne campaign was the largest, deadliest campaign in U.S. military history in terms of casualties, in terms of days fought, et cetera. Over 1 million soldiers, American soldiers, participated in this, of which 26,000 were killed. For a soldier, that's just unbelievable to me when you think those numbers. And this is one campaign. Of course, the Meuse-Argonne campaign was in September, October, November of 2018, and it was the final campaign where we pushed the Germans back and it ended the war and gave us Armistice Day on 11 November. An interesting story here. Right off the upper right-hand corner of that is a heavily wooded area. And a young Brigadier General MacArthur and a young Lieutenant Colonel Patton met on that battlefield, just a few hundred meters off the edge of that cemetery. It's an amazing story. It was during the San Miguel and the Meuse-Argonne campaign. And folks, that meeting between MacArthur and Patton, who were icons later on during World War II, that was the first and last time the two of them would ever meet. It was very interesting to me. During the Battle of the Meuse-Argonne, we saw substantial use of gas, chlorine, sarin, mustard, those terrible gases that choked and killed a soldier. A lot of those folks that suffered those casualties are buried in this cemetery here. And again, though, this is the battle that brought World War II to a close. All right, take a look at these two cemeteries. One is the Carrizal Cemetery in Panama, the one on the left, and the Mexico City Cemetery. The Carrizal Cemetery is one of 2 ABMC cemeteries that are still open to burials. The other is Clark Veteran Cemetery in the Philippines. But buried here in the Panama one are primarily Americans who built and maintained the Panama Canal, but who built the canal in the early 1900s, and their dependents. We also have Civil War, Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, and Korean War vets, and the Vietnam War that are buried in this cemetery. And we have one person from the Gulf War that's buried here. Carrizal, we were given Carrizal back in 1982 when President Carter, as you'll recall, turned over the Panama Canal Zone to the Panamanians. While we had the American Cemetery, wouldn't let them turn that over, so we took it over. Also, another interesting story here. On the right is the Mexico City Cemetery. I know a few of you have probably been to Mexico City. This is our smallest cemetery. It's only 1.5 acres. It's right in the center of Mexico City. It's a beautiful little cemetery, and it contains the remains of at least 850 American soldiers that were killed in the Mexican-American War. Now, if you would just take a look at that that fence line off to the right that goes up. A few meters from that, a young Lieutenant Ulysses Grant in the 48th Infantry fought right there. So some of his soldiers are buried under that obelisk that you see there. A lot of history, folks, are woven into this. This is the Clark Veterans Cemetery. We've been maintaining this since 2013. You remember Mount Pinatubo when it erupted back in 1991? I was on active duty in the Pacific on that. But the U.S. Clark Air Force Base, which was a huge Air Force base at the time, was just absolutely ruined. So the Air Force gave up the base and sold it and gave it back to the Philippines. But we took over the cemetery. So I wanted to show you a picture there. You can see the ash on the lower left-hand picture. If you look closely, you can see where the ash was high enough to go up and damage some of the headstones there, and then you can see a clean headstone afterward. So by law, this is open today for burial of U.S. vets and World War II Philippine scouts. This is an interesting cemetery. It's actually a cemetery, folks, and a battle memorial. It's the Lafayette Escadrille Memorial Cemetery. We acquired this in 2017. Honored here are America's combat aviation pioneers, many of whom are buried in a crypt below that white memorial that you see. And I have walked down through that crypt along with our commissioners and so forth. This photo that you see was taken in April 2016 on the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the Lafayette Escadrille. This was a French squadron where Americans volunteered to go fight in it before the U.S. even entered the war in 2017. Most of those Americans were Ivy League kids who quit in their sophomore and junior year to go over and fight in the Great War with the French. It's very interesting. There are 51 burials here, 49 Americans, there's 1 Canadian and 1 Frenchman. Folks, take a look at this. These are some names you may recognize. In our Normandy American Cemetery, we have both of Theodore Roosevelt's 2 sons. Our chaplain mentioned Teddy Roosevelt. We have Quentin, who was in the Army Air Corps, was shot down and killed in World War I. And then we have Teddy Jr., who just a few weeks after he made the landing on Utah Beach in 1944, died of, I believe it was a heart attack. Well, they are both buried there. We also have the Nyland brothers. I don't know how many have ever heard of the Nyland brothers, but the Nyland brothers became the inspiration for the film Saving Private Ryan. Steven Spielberg, a film of 1998, is loosely based on this story. There were 4 brothers, Frederick, Bob, Preston, and Edward. All 4 fought in the war. 3 made the D-Day Normandy invasion. 1 was killed when they jumped in with the 101st Airborne Division. The other was killed 2 days after they landed on Utah Beach. And actually, Frederick was the one who played Private Ryan. Remember? His name was Fritz. And that's the story. And so Fritz went out to look for his other brothers who knew they had participated in the D-Day invasion. And I think most of you are familiar with that movie, Saving Private Ryan. But the Nyland brothers are buried there, and that's the inspiration for that movie. Then there's General George Patton, one of America's most storied commanders. He is buried there in our Luxembourg Cemetery. As you know, he got through the war, but was killed in a really tragic automobile accident on a Sunday morning on his way to go hunting. They had enough time to get Mrs. Patton and some of the families overseas. And on his deathbed there in Germany, where he died in an American hospital in Germany, they wanted to bring his remains home, and he said, "No, you bury me here with my men." Joyce Kilmer. You know, my generation, we had to memorize the poem Trees. I hope that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree. Joyce Kilmer is buried there. He refused a commission. He was a New Yorker. He refused a commission to be an officer, wanted to go in as an enlisted man, fought with the famous 69th Infantry out of New York. Killed in July of 1918 at the age of 31. Let's go to the five Sullivan brothers. I know you've heard of them. The five Sullivan brothers were from Waterloo, Iowa. At the advent of World War II, all of them went down to the local recruiting station and signed up. They wouldn't go in unless they could all go in the same service. The service was the Navy. And they wouldn't go in unless they were promised to be on the same ship. That's a true story. So they were on the USS Juno, all five of them, when it got torpedoed in 1942 in the Philippine Sea. All five. So for the ladies and the mothers in the audience, could you imagine when that knock on the door? So there's a couple of stories on this. The casualty assistance team did go to the door, knocked on the door. It was the father that answered, opened the screen door, and he said, "Which one?" All five. Anyway, folks, they are there in the Manila Cemetery. And the last one I wanted to point out was our Cambridge Cemetery, which I showed you an earlier picture. This is where you have Navy Lieutenant Joe Patrick Kennedy, the older brother, obviously, of President Kennedy. And he was on an Aphrodite mission crossing the channel in a B-24. And there's still a suspect as to whether it was shot down, what happened, or whatever. But it's a very interesting secret mission he was on. It was a precursor to the U.S. looking at drones and so forth. And he was on that mission, and his plane went down. They never found his remains. And of course, if you know the Kennedy family or you read about him, the father knew Roosevelt real well. And he clamored for months for Roosevelt to find his son remains. You know, we were at war. The English Channel is big, so they never found his remains, so he's on the walls of the missing. And so the father said, well, that son was going to be president of the United States. That's what he told Roosevelt. It's in the notes. And so obviously he then shifted to his next son, which was John Kennedy. Another interesting thing about that is the pilot in command of the mission that Kennedy was on that day was Elliott Roosevelt. He was the commander of the flying unit. That's the son of FDR. I mean, these are two little vignettes that I found as secretary, just so very, very interesting. All right, folks, let me shift now to battle monuments. So those were just a few of ABMC's 26 cemeteries. All are beautiful, very serene national treasures with inspirational stories to tell. But folks, remember, the name of our agency is the American Battle Monuments Commission, which commemorating service and sacrifice by establishing monuments. This has been a core mission of ABMC since 1923. This chart shows you 3 of ABMC's 32 memorials. Montsec and Chateau Thierry are World War I monuments you see on the left-hand side. They're in France. Pershing and his designers designed these monuments on a grand scale, folks. Another impressive site is the Honolulu Memorial, which you see on the right. I'm sure many of you have seen that when you went to Oahu. And the Honolulu Memorial actually has 2 separate areas that contain the names of the missing Americans and lost or buried at sea from World War II in the Pacific and from the Korean and Vietnam Wars. So there's a separate Korean section to it and a separate Vietnam War. These are magnificent monuments. They're landscaped beautifully, and they commemorate the achievements and the sacrifice of American soldiers. Every one of our battle monuments has a relief mat at the bottom, so you can read about that particular area of the battle and what those men went through. There's stories of units and soldiers. if you get an opportunity, you just need to visit some of these battle monuments. This is the Pointe du Hoc Ranger Monument. This is about 9 kilometers west of the Normandy American Cemetery. It's an iconic site in U.S. military history where Army Rangers, the 2nd Ranger Battalion, scaled those cliffs on the morning of D-Day and moved up about 120-foot cliffs to destroy German guns that were up there, right in that area in the large photo to the right. There were 6 German guns there that could actually range both Normandy and Utah beaches. And of course, this was made famous. This particular point was made famous in the movie The Longest Day, and by President Reagan in his speech at the 40th anniversary of D-Day, when he talked about, if you remember, the boys of Pointe du Hoc. This is the Battle of the Bulge Memorial. And our commission, Ben's in our commission here, we were able to bring this within the portfolio of ABMC during my period as secretary. I signed an agreement on behalf of ABMC with the Belgian government for long-term care and management of this. This monument that you see here was built in 1950 by monies collected from the Belgian people in the Bastogne area, just thanking God and for their gratitude of what the American soldier did back then. The Belgian government sort of frankly allowed the monument to deteriorate, and so our American ambassador, Ron Gidwitz, our American ambassador to Belgium at the time, who lives here in Florida, incidentally, he launched an effort to acquire this monument, gave me a call, pulled me in and said, would ABMC support? I said, of course we would. This was the largest battle of World War II, and we'd love to get it. So anyway, to make a long story short, we acquired that, and that, as you can see by the grand scale, it's a huge monument. It's on Martiston Hill, right outside of Bastogne, you know, which was, as I say, another huge battle. The Meuse-Argonne was the largest campaign ever. The Battle of the Bulge was the largest battle in World War II. 450,000 German troops, 680,000 U.S., and we 76,000, 8,600 American soldiers killed at the Battle of the Bulge. This is our National World War I Memorial. The World War I Centennial Commission restored Pershing Park in Washington, D.C. I'm sure many of you visited that. And they added a spectacular new sculpture, which you can see there on the right-hand side. So the park was rededicated, folks, as the National World War I Memorial in April of 2021. That was the last official act I was able to do as secretary before I got my letter from the Biden administration to leave. But anyway, this is ABMC's newest battle monument. So now really, we finally have a national memorial honoring the American soldiers who lost their lives in World War I. You know we have a World War II memorial right there in Washington, D.C. You know we have a National Korean War memorial there, and you know about the Vietnam War for Vietnam, but we never had one for World War I. We have one now. Please visit it when you're in D.C. All right, let me shift here very quickly. I want to turn now to a renewed focus for ABMC. When I came in, I sat down with my staff, and a few people had put this in my ear before I took over as secretary. You know, the ABMC had been, as I say, it started in the 20s to take care of those World War I soldiers, and then the World War II soldiers. But I was asking myself, how do we maintain our relevance going into the 21st century? When the agency was established following World War I, the visitors didn't need any historical context. They knew the story. It was the wives and the mothers who visited the cemeteries. They were not there to learn, They were there to grieve and to say farewell to their son or daughter, which they didn't have the opportunity to do. But that's no longer the case. So I think it's important that our younger generations know about the American Battle Monuments Commission, what it stands for, and the American soldiers that are buried there. So we sort of shifted the paradigm while I was there, and they're continuing with it, and we've moved into a more of an educational type agency. Let me mention this too. In World War I and World War II, once the quartermaster units after the war went through these various temporary battlefields and dug up the remains of our soldiers, and they were identified, the U.S. government offered the next of kin back home. In World War I, it was mostly mothers. It was an unmarried army. We will bring your son home for you and bury them in the United States, or you can leave them at a beautiful American cemetery where they fell. 60% elected to bring them home, and we brought the remains home in a casket. Everything was paid for through World War I and World War II. And 40% remained over there in our cemeteries. So, and that was true also for World War II. It was about a 60% wanted the remains brought home, 40% leave them on the foreign soil where they fell in battle. As I say, in a paradigm shift here from the grieving mothers, you see a photo there on the left. That was a photo taken in 1930. Also, the American government brought the grieving families over at no expense, put them up in Paris hotels, brought them by rail to the various cemeteries in Belgium and France so they could visit their son and daughter's graves. You see that, and that was the common occurrence in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. But the shift now, as I say, is to the 21st century. So the photo on the right is a more recent photo where you see folks visiting and learning as part of the education program there. Also, as part of the education program, the ABMC started to build visitor centers. The first one was 2007, you can see at the top of the list there, at the Normandy American Cemetery. So we have 9 visitor centers at those cemeteries that you see there. The Chateau Thierry, the Lafayette Escadrille, and the Manila were all built and dedicated during our watch as secretary. The Netherlands American Cemetery, which shows 2023, actually was just dedicated in 2024. But these are beautiful visitor centers right contiguous to the cemetery where you go in and you can see actual photos of some of the soldiers that are buried right outside. You can see the equipment and so forth. What we have in there, I will say, can match any of the military museums here in the United States. One is the Lafayette Escadrille Memorial Visitor Center. You can see there. That was dedicated on Armistice Day 2019 by one of my commissioners. We took an old caretaker's cottage you see on the left and converted that to tell the story of the Escadrille. We actually went out and I was able to get money through Wasserman Schultz, who handled the Congressional Budget Committee. I had to go before her every year, you know, and get my budget. But she was good. She was pretty good. But anyway, she gave us money to go out and buy a Newport fighter. The Newport fighter was the French-built fighter that the American pilots used during World War I. And I wanted to show that there, so we bought one. We had to cut it in half. You can see it, it's in there. So if there are any aviation enthusiasts in the audience, I know where you can get another half of one. Okay, folks. I mentioned the education program. In the top right, you can see the first publications. These are pictures of the first publications. We have them in our little window box at ABMC headquarters. But you know who wrote the very first battle, World War I battlefield histories? Was a young major named Dwight D. Eisenhower. Yeah. Yeah. The Chief of Staff of the Army sent him over, and he spent over a year over there, pretty much without Mamie, roaming the battlefields, collecting notes, etc., and writing these. And since then, we publish about every 3 or 4 years a new battle monument guidebook. Also, you can see where some of the notes are along across the bottom here under a new approach. We've engaged universities throughout America. We've brought in teachers at the high school level. We've resourced packets for them on the history of the ABMC and on these cemeteries and the battles and so forth. We've done global reach through distance learning. So the American Battle Monuments is doing a great job in keeping the story alive of the deeds of these soldiers. Okay, folks, let me move now to commemoration. As I say, the cemeteries and the memorials ABMC administers on behalf of the American people, these are national treasures, folks. They commemorate historical significant events and individuals, as I say, who changed the course of history. I've tried to mention a few to you. But another way that the Commission remembers that history and that honor and sacrifice is by hosting annual ceremonies. During my watch, we had a couple very key ceremonies. As you can imagine, Memorial Day is a major ceremony. All 26 cemeteries have beautiful Memorial Day services. And the local French people, the Italians, the Dutch, wherever, they all want to participate. It's wonderful. Their grade school kids come out and put flowers on the graves. They are Memorial Days like you've never seen. So as I say, during my tenure, we had some significant ones. One was the World War I centennial. I had been in office about 11 months when 11 November 2018 was the 100th anniversary. And of course, our Commander-in-Chief, President Trump, came over. He gave a beautiful speech that day. It reminded me of how your president here earlier called out each veteran here and let them stand out and introduce themselves. That's wonderful to take the time to honor these veterans like that. Trump did that at this ceremony in the pouring rain. Some of you may have seen it because it was all over the news networks, et cetera. But he did that. There were six World War I veterans in the audience. Their sons, daughters, relatives were there. 2 or 3 were in wheelchairs. But he took time as he stood there in the pouring rain. I was right next to him. We got soaked. But he told the story of each one. It was just a wonderful moment. And this was done at our Suresnes Cemetery, which is a small cemetery right outside of Paris. Incidentally, in the Suresnes Cemetery are many American soldiers who suffered the influenza back then in 2018 and died in the Paris hospitals are buried in that cemetery. The next major event was the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings. We all just witnessed the 80th. But folks, this was the largest overseas event in ABMC history. You can see over 14,000 guests were there. It was done right in the cemetery. 2 presidents, President Macron and his wife, Bridget, and of course, President Trump and our First Lady, Melania, were there. You can see the number of senators, the cabinet officials, the general officers, et cetera. But that's not important. What's important? Look at the veterans there. There were 171 World War II veterans. Of that 171, 59 had actually crossed the beaches or parachuted in with the 82nd and 101st Airborne Division on D-Day. So it just, it really choked me up. Linda and I had the opportunity to go over on the Queen Mary 2 weeks before with 22 of those veterans. That the Queen Mary is a Cunard liner. It leaves New York City and arrives Southampton. They turned that whole liner over to people who were coming over for the 75th anniversary. Among them were 22 World War II vets who attended our ceremony. My wife can tell you the story. These guys were full of it, I'll tell you. They danced till 2 or 3 in the morning, didn't they? But I mean, I just get out because this was one of the most wonderful moments of Bill Matz's life. I was the host for that, and I was pulled in about 2 months, told to come over to the White House, and they told me, said, Matz, this is a very key ceremony. Nothing can be screwed up, you know? And that weighed on me, But our staff pulled together, and we pulled this one off, and it went extremely well. I also, President Trump arrived by his helicopter exactly on time. Macron was about 40 minutes late. Wasn't really his fault because remember now, this is D-Day. He was hosting a French ceremony up in Paris, so he had to get down there. And so in the meantime, President Trump had a news conference right there on the cemetery grounds. Lara, what's her name, Ingraham, was the one who gave it. I'm sure you probably saw it at the time. So somebody had to take care of the First Lady, and I was given that job. Yeah. So I mean, it was a lovely short time with her. She very elegant, very poised. I had to walk her across the grass from the helicopter into the building. She had she had spiked heels. Worry about that sinking in. But she was very stoic, but very lovely. And I tried to get a little bit of a conversation going with her, but nothing moved her until I finally said, Mrs. Trump, my grandson plays soccer with Barron. Oh my God, she jumped. She said, what's his name? And his name, and I gave the name. And they in fact did. They played on a DC soccer team for 2 years. Yeah, so that sort of loosened her up a little bit. But that was a lovely time. I was told I did pretty good, you know. But on that day, President Macron and Trump, if you listen to the national TV, the speeches that they both gave were absolutely marvelous, were wonderful. France and America, France, our oldest ally, they came together like that. It was just wonderful. It would make your heart feel good. But anyway, folks, it was the 151 vets sitting behind us that really made the day. As the two presidents exited, all this is on TV too, exited the stage to go to the next event and continue on with the ceremony, they got up into there were 12 rows up behind us. Macron got all the way up to about the 11th or 12th row. I mean, because the vets were just pulling them in, hugging them, and they were hugging the vets. It was a wonderful day. I was standing down there at the exit with President Trump, and he said, he called you General. He said, General, would you go up there and get him and bring him down? I want to stay on schedule. I just want to tell you a little anecdote there. Okay, folks. Another event was the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. As I said, the largest World War II battle fought by the U.S. Army. This was a 4-day commemoration, and it was largely around our Luxembourg cemetery where Patton is buried. It was a great ceremony. Chairman of JCS Milley was there. Secretary Esper, who was the new Secretary of Defense, was there. And again, just a wonderful anniversary ceremony for the Battle of the Bulge. Folks, this photo, in my view, says it all. You've got the white headstones against a manicured green lawn, a sober yet inspiring symbol of the cost of freedom and of the willingness of the American soldier to give all in the common cause. And if you look closely, you'll see a little girl walking among the headstones. So to me, that is the future, learning from the past someday to pass their memories to a child of their own. So one photo, I think, capturing the ABMC mission of honoring service and sacrifice and fulfilling General Pershing's promise that time will not dim the glory of their deeds. This is my last chart here. I also want to show you under a sacred mission, honoring service and sacrifice. These were the words of President Trump on Memorial Day 2017, where he said, "Words cannot measure the depth of their devotion, the purity of their love, or the totality of their courage." It was a great saying, and those remarks are there in our Soren American Cemetery. I want to now close, folk, with just a short 2.5-minute clip that speaks to who we are as a nation and those whose sacrifice we must never forget.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. You will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. The tide has turned. We will accept nothing less than full victory.
On the 6th of June, I landed on Omaha Beach at 6:30 in the morning. The only thought on my mind at that particular time was survival. And you could not help anybody. You were lucky if you made it to shore. And the tide was coming in very fast. They were destined to drown if nobody came to their help. So I dropped what I was doing and I went back to the water. I took as many minutes as I could until I became exhausted. I am not a hero, I just did my job. And the heroes, the real heroes are laying here on the cemeteries. These are our heroes. And we should never forget them.
Of course, that was General Eisenhower that spoke on the eve of the D-Day invasion. That's a clip that rarely can be found. We were able to dig it out of the archives, and I just think it speaks of what happened that day and of the American Battle Monuments Commission. So those 3.5 years that I served as your secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission, I will tell you, are among the most meaningful, the most memorable of my public service. Thank you again for the opportunity to present this. I look forward to your questions.